Simone Petrella. Who am I? What do I do? Let me start over. So I'm Simone Petrella. I'm CEO of CyberVista, and we're a cybersecurity workforce development and education company. I think the thing I like best about being CEO is building really incredible teams and watching those teams succeed and empower them to do the amazing work that they can do. So, the dynamics of what does it take to really bring a group of people together and blend their strengths and account for their weaknesses so that you can kind of achieve a common goal is probably the most rewarding thing about it to me. I think like a lot of cyber professionals where my path into the industry was actually not through computer science or cybersecurity per se. I actually started out in the Department of Defense, and I have a threat intelligence background. So I started out doing counterterrorism, a lot of intelligence support to operations around counterterrorism missions. And in 2005, I left government and went to work for Booz Allen, where about the second project I ever worked on was an intel support to computer network operations job. And so my background in the industry is all in the threats of different cyber actors and what they could do in this context into the DoD or the US government. And at the time, it was not a popular mission. It wasn't the sexy thing to do. But I distinctly remember going home one day and thinking to myself, I don't know where this whole computer thing is going, but let's stick it out and see where it happens. And the industry changed so much starting in 2007, where threat intelligence and the impact of threats to, information warfare and information assurance started to explode. And frankly, that's when they even started to call it cyber. So when I started, it wasn't even considered cybersecurity. It was either computer network operations or computer network exploitation or computer network defense. And, it was one of those things that I thought was so cool because it was transnational. It required a good blend of, geopolitical skills because of the threat intelligence background. But then I got to learn something new on the job, which was how does that impact from a technical perspective. So I got my start there and kind of continued to build up my expertise and the team, and the mission grew. And ultimately ended up in the commercial sector doing consulting for banks and retailers around how they could operationalize what had been military-grade threat intelligence that was now a critical component of, the cybersecurity landscape in the private sector. But across our journey, I had the problem that, at least for me, I was looking to solve, which was, this was an emerging field. There was a ton of opportunity, and I could not hire and retain staff to fill the gaps of what I needed in my project. So my common, story I tell is that I would find really great talent, and I would say, okay, we're gonna give them, training. We're gonna get them technical expertise. For me, I loved finding people with alternative backgrounds and making them and growing them into cyber professionals, whether it be through their technical expertise or something else. And after about 18 months, they would say, thank you so much for this experience. I've learned so much. I have accepted another job offer from a competitor for 30% more. And I couldn't do anything about it. I was like, I don't have that leeway to give you a 30% raise after you've, worked somewhere for 18 months. So I lived this problem, this kind of workforce shortage where there just wasn't enough qualified talent to fill the roles. And so in 2015, I had the opportunity to found CyberVista, and our mission is to disrupt the way we think about the model of education. So the underpinning of our philosophy is that companies need to invest in growing and developing their talent inside first, and stop relying on external forces, whether it be universities or vocational schools or even traditional training mechanisms, to somehow create a workforce that they need, especially when the job roles have changed so significantly. When I think about what that's meant to CyberVista, the jobs that exist today, some of them didn't exist 2 years ago. Some of them didn't exist 3 years ago. Almost all of them didn't exist when I started in this in 2005. The industry is moving quickly and the jobs are changing, but the underlying skills are actually fairly consistent and evergreen. So, the big thing when you talk about training, especially on technical skills, is one, for me, it's not about training someone on a particular tool or technology. I'd rather teach them how to fish. What is the theory behind how network traffic is configured, and what does that mean to do something securely, and how do packets and how does data actually flow through a network, or where is it stored? And understanding that theory and kind of what's happening behind the scenes equips people to adapt as the landscape changes, as the roles start to change. But really the name of the game is how do you create someone who's fungible? And that's why I think that from a training perspective, yes, you have to be adaptable and do that, but you can kind of cut to the core of those skills. I don't have a background in education and training, but it's certainly something that leads into it. And so I actually am really fascinated with how the overlap of my world now intersects with even what we're seeing with schools, and which schools are going back in person and which ones are doing online learning. And I think it does always come back to education. I think every issue comes back to education. And if I had to say the biggest thing I see on the kind of when we think about learning is I would love to see a world where we could go back and kind of teach people how to learn and have a passion for learning. Because, if you're interested and have the willingness, it's not just that you need to somehow have like a hidden talent for this. It's actually my biggest pet peeve is when people tell me, well, the only people that I can have be a cybersecurity professional are those that, take apart computers in their spare time and put them back together. And they're hacking things and playing video games, and they figure that all out from, every waking moment they have where they're not doing something that they absolutely need to do. And I think that does a massive disservice to not only the industry, but also the types of people that could be successful in the industry, because it essentially limits anyone who is working 2 jobs because they have to take care of a family member and they're the sole caretaker, or they are struggling to put themselves through school, or just any series of obligations where they actually certainly have the interest, and if someone would nurture and invest in them, they can do that. And so when I think about the education system today, it's you can do anything with almost any skill set. What you really have to kind of instill in the next generation is that ability to absorb new material and learn something new. And how do what are the skills or traits you need to pick up new skills that can be translatable into a lot of new environments and a lot of new job opportunities. And that's exciting. So it does start early, and I think that there's also a lot to be said for the marketing problem that cybersecurity careers have. I got into the industry in 2005. It's 15 years later, and we've made some incremental progress on representation from women and minorities, but not a ton. And even some of the gains that we have made is primarily due to the fact that there's a bit of a broader definition of what counts as a cybersecurity job. So, I don't know if we've made as big of a dent in women and minority representation as we would. So I do think it has to also start back with how do we think about the problem? How do we portray this as a job field that people can get interested in? There are so many prongs to it. It's so difficult. But that's where I think that coming in early is important. But on the other side of the coin, I also think that's where companies have to acknowledge we can't just start with trying to create a new pipeline. We're just not going to get there fast enough. So how do we think about people that are in dire need right now for a job change or are looking for a job? And while they might not at first blush look like they'd be your typical cybersecurity professional, they could be really, really good. And frankly, you'll probably end up waiting less and spending less on them than waiting for the 8th grader to come through high school and then whatever, higher education they need to go to get them into the job workforce. I think that especially around cybersecurity, we're in a position to fundamentally change the paradigm of how we as a society think about training kind of skilled workforce. And when I say skilled, specifically around cybersecurity and tech talent, I think that we're stuck in this kind of old model of you have to go to a traditional 4-year education degree school, or you have to get a degree in computer science, or you have to get a degree, or you have to, go take a certain credential. And the reality is that some of the most talented people that exist in this field have not come from any of those backgrounds. And I think that there's a real opportunity, especially in time of COVID, where we can actually change the way that we think about kind of educating and getting people to the workforce. Yeah, so first, Hank and I go way back. We cross paths, and essentially, in many ways, Hank is responsible for my career in cybersecurity, and I think that it's actually a good example of how people take a risk on you and see something in you maybe you don't see in yourself, and it puts you on a path that you might not have otherwise expected. And I think that in many ways, SCV is now embodying that for companies, because it's taking companies that are kind of in those initial seed stages that are trying to then grow into real companies, and it requires the nurturing and someone to see something in those companies that they might not even see for themselves, because they're just trying to slog through survival and getting to the next round of funding and getting to this thing. So being able to be part of a company where I can relate to some of the experiences they're going through, because I am going through some of them myself as well as has gone through them, and the fact that I think that it's a really important part of the mission space in cybersecurity, as well as economically, to provide an avenue for us to stimulate some really cutting edge solutions and technologies that wouldn't otherwise have a real path, or they do have a path. They certainly have lots of other options, but the philosophy and approach that SCV has taken is a more hands-on, proactive approach, and I think that that's really important, because it's about growing value, right? Like when you're starting a company, I think there's a short-term perspective of just how quickly can you get out and what's the ROI, and yes, that's important, but it's can you actually work with and support companies that are really contributing something of value to the market and to their customers as well. And I think that SCV kind of embodies that mission first focused perspective in kind of capital allocation. Oh man, I don't know. I think that story is yet to be written. I mean, I like to think that I'll be able to go out and eat in restaurants again. I haven't done years. That would be great. No, but I think making a difference in the world. I think I see CyberVista growing, and so I'd like to be part of that for the long term. I think we're doing something really special, and want to see what that grows into. And if that can give me some time to do some photography and cook a few more meals at home in the interim, I would love to do that. In my spare time, I do really enjoy landscape photography. I like being outdoors, and I think that COVID and quarantine has definitely reignited a love for the outdoors, because it's one of the few things that we could do. So whether it be hiking or just being by the water, I love anything that's by the water. And if in normal times, that includes things like golfing. So I was a golfer in college, and so I still golf today. Which I was a little bit better like I used to be, but we move on. And certainly, cooking and listening to good music and spending time with my family. So I think that every experience you have kind of just like shapes you for what you are moving forward. And if my experience and my path to get here today taught me nothing else, it's that you kind of have to go with the flow and not necessarily think only in one linear direction. At least for those of us in the world, which I am certainly one of them, that didn't have a clear-cut career goal or calling, if you will, of what I wanted to be. But I think that the flexibility and the fungibility of being thrust into different experiences and having to kind of learn on the fly, I can say, like, being a CEO, like my background's in threat intelligence, I have been in consulting, I certainly knew a little bit about all aspects of business through being in the consulting world, but I don't have an MBA. I don't have a background in marketing or sales. Like, those are all areas that you kind of have to learn in a crash course, but all of a sudden you're charged with running a company that has all those elements. But you learn it, and it's also really important to then find people to surround yourself with, like anything else, that do know it really well and can be part of that team. So I think it's a constant journey, and I've learned from my past experiences that you have to be willing to stick your neck out and get uncomfortable, and when you're uncomfortable, then that's when kind of really special things can happen.